We are back with another video on the journey to 2000 and beyond. We're playing somebody above 2000, just barely 2001 rated. Are they from Indonesia or Poland? I can never be sure. It looks like Indonesia. The red and white flags confuse me. They're playing an untraditional opening. This is called the Van Croij's opening. And usually when players don't commit to the center of the board, you should just try to develop normally. From what I understand. So we're going to play knight moves. Maybe knight c6 is not the best because it's preventing the development of my c pawn. But here, c4 is fairly committal. Do I take and allow their bishop into the game, or do I play knight f6? I'm not entirely sure. Another thing to consider is possibly playing d4, in which case they would probably play e4. Or maybe they would take. I don't know. Taking seems worse to me. Let's see. Here, I'm actually not entirely sure what I should do. I'll just develop. I just can't imagine this being a bad move, even though it gives up a little bit of the center. It just doesn't strike me as something that could be too bad. This move b4 is threatening b5. It's a very strange way to play chess. I'm not gonna lie. If I play d4 once again, there's actually e4 is not a move because knight takes now is possible. So I'll play d4, and we'll see what they decide to do. If they let me open things up, which they seem to be okay with. Now, taking here doesn't really make too much sense to me. It just helps my opponent develop. The advantage I have currently is the lack of development of my opponent. Can I continue to build pressure somehow is the question. What if I play e4? E4 seems very ambitious, but it's essentially just grabbing more and more space. There's the possibility of going b5, kicking out my knight, and then taking this pawn. But the pawn is defended, so that's not a big problem. If I play e4, what is my opponent likely to do? Honestly, not entirely sure. Let's try e4. I doubt this is the best move, to be super honest. I am probably overextending my pawns. Bishop b2 creates long-term pressure on this d4 pawn, and it's hard for me to defend. Okay, they decide to take. So obviously here I will take back. I don't think I'm missing any checks or threats here. So this move is played. And now maybe I can find some sort of intermediate move. Sometimes there's ideas to take, and it can be dangerous for white. So let's calculate this first. So knight takes, king takes, pawn takes. The king has to go back because the queen would be hanging. So knight takes, king takes, pawn takes. The king has to go either back or to this side here. And then there would probably be the idea of bringing the knight in. I actually like this. I wonder if move order matters here. If I go queen here first, there's pawn up. In which case there's sometimes the idea of knight takes, queen check, king down. I don't see a winning idea there. I like knight takes. It is kind of forcing too because it hits the queen. This is something, when you do something this pivotal, you need to calculate fully. So knight takes, king takes, pawn takes. We have two possible options, king e2 or king e1. If king e1, we've established that queen check is probably very strong because there's no good way to block it. If king e2, so knight takes, pawn takes, king e2, then there's simply, oh wait, no, there's no knight c3. This is really fun though. I'm gonna play this because it might pose practical problems for my opponent who now has to think. So they play pretty fast. Here we're taking with the pawn, and at the very least, we do have two pawns for my opponent's for my knight. Sorry, two of my opponent's pawns for my knight. Here I have the move. Oh, I thought I had a check here. I don't, unfortunately. I can play knight d4. This does give up the pawn, but then I can maybe play bishop c5, and this looks kind of appealing to me. Probably should have calculated this a little bit more. I'm playing this kind of like it's blitz, but let's do this. Knight d4 check. The idea is to play bishop c5 and castle. And the king is uncastled. My opponent's king is uncastled, so I'm just mounting enormous pressure which is bound to lead to some sort of chances. I don't see exactly how I'm going to be winning material here. Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't see that as a possibility. I just have queen check here. This just wins. Did my opponent miss this? Clearly, this just wins the game. The king has no squares. And like this goes to show you, like you don't need to necessarily see everything in an attack. Wow. Wow. That's insane. All right, let's take a look at the analysis. That was crazy. Okay, so from the beginning of this one, my opponent kind of threw me off here. Playing with the white pieces, usually you want to take the initiative. But my opponent played in such a way where it almost felt like I was playing with the white pieces. And when that happens, usually more or less, you play the same way you usually do. Put the pawns in the center of the board, develop your pieces towards the center, and all this is fine. Now here with c4, the first practical question was posed. I was wondering what I should do in this position, whether I should take the pawn, which would probably be slightly worse, because it allows my opponent to get some development with the also added caveat of winning the pawn back. So the best move in this position is d4. And the point is that, let's say that they just take the pawn, well, now knight takes, and they forever have a hole here on the e file. And this knight is just very, very strong. If they ever try to play like f4, for example, to just break things open, they can't really do that because the king would be super weak. So you are left with like an incredibly solid knight on d4. And if they decide not to do anything about this and just play like, you know, what they eventually play later with d3, well, you're never going to actually take this pawn. Apparently you can't do it, but there's no urgency to that move. You can just develop normally. So you can play something like knight e7, knight f6. For some reason, the engine doesn't like knight f6 as much, but everything is relative here. I mean, black is just better because of the central control, and that's the key element. Here, I just decided to play knight f6. I figured, like, it's okay if they take. I'll take back. It's still as if I'm playing with white, but I do give up a little bit of that central control. So here they probably should have taken. They instead went for the second best move, which is b4. Obviously, when you face players who play like this, they're used to these types of ideas. So even though like the engine says it's slightly worse, I don't think it's inherently a bad thing to play this way. You just have to understand what your opponent's best responses are and how to address them. So in this situation, I found the best move, which is d4. And after d3, apparently taking now would have been best. But even if I didn't want to take something like a5 to try to fight back on the queen side, or for example, just developing, preparing to castle would have been better. I instead played this move e4, and e4 is not as good. Still slightly better for black, but it's trending towards equality. e4 is not as good because of pawn takes, knight takes, and now not pushing the knight away, but rather playing knight f3 here and winning the pawn back slowly. Now if d takes, you can probably just trade the queens and either force the king to lose its castling rights or force the knight to undevelop. So either of these options would be better for white. Instead, my opponent tried to get greedy and win a pawn. The point is after b5, if I move this knight, let's say I move it anywhere really, like to e5 for example, now my opponent wins the pawn on d4 and simply just goes up a pawn here in this position. So I kind of figured that b5 wouldn't work. I didn't know exactly why. Apparently, if I played d takes e3, that would have been a way out. So d takes e3, if you take the knight, well, then all of a sudden you're gonna probably just get steamrolled. So for example, here, if you take the knight, now e takes on f2, the king has to go to e2, and now knight g3 apparently wins the game because the king has no spot that defends the queen. So you're not actually going for the fork of the rook and the king. You're actually trying to distract the king so that you can take the queen on d1. So I didn't see all this. I just figured this was a bad move. If I had ruled out knight takes on f2, maybe I would have spotted d takes. on e3. It's good to keep this in the back of my mind here. But in this position, I decided to make things interesting. And I didn't necessarily see the entire line here, but I figured that after knight takes on f2, there's just simply no way this king is going to survive without having to sacrifice material back. And my intuition proved to be correct. So already in this position, note that according to the engine, king takes is bad. You should not be taking back with the king. Apparently, you should just be moving your queen away, accepting the fact that you're going to lose a rook, which is really hard to play here. So king takes is played by white. The idea is d takes on e3. Now, what I saw initially when I was looking at this position, what I saw was knight takes, king takes, pawn takes. If king takes on e3, the queen is lost on d1. So my opponent obviously should not allow that. After d takes on e3, they either have the option to go king e2 or king e1. The engine also notes bishop takes on e3 as an idea, but that does also give up the queen. And the reason why bishop takes on e3 is around the same evaluation as king e2 is because of what we saw in the game. After king e2, the knight d4, bishop c5 idea is just going to eventually win you, at the very least, a ton of material, but most likely my opponent's going to have to sacrifice their queen to stop the attack. So king e2 played, here knight d4 check, and now the whole point is that if the king takes on e3, you play bishop c5, which just sets up some really nasty discovery ideas. You can also go apparently knight f5 check, and the point is that now the king has to step back to defend the queen, and now you just play knight g3 check. Once the king goes to e1 here, you can probably just take, king takes, and now knight takes on h1, and you're just completely winning. But it's a little less convincing. The best option, and the one that I had seen, was that after king takes, you can play bishop c5. And bishop c5 sets up pretty much unstoppable discovery ideas. If you want to get out of the discovered check, you're going to have to move your king. If you move it along the d file, well, then there's going to be ideas to play, well, here bishop f5 is just winning. But you can also just play moves like knight b3 check, because it's a discovery. And this allows you to win the queen and the rook and so on. So this is also winning. So you don't want to necessarily move your king along the d file. And if you move it elsewhere, moving it on the f2 square is out of the question because of the same discovery idea. The bishop controls that diagonal. Moving it on e4 looks god-awful. I mean, bishop f5, and you can pretty much just resign. And that really only leaves the move king f4, but putting your king out in the open is not what you want to be doing. Now the queen comes in with checks, the bishop's going to come in, you're going to castle and get discovery ideas against the queen. Everything looks completely crushing here. So this is not something I necessarily calculated, but I just saw that the king is not going to survive out in the open. My opponent, to their credit, saw that king takes was probably not going to be a favorable outcome for them too. But unluckily for my opponent, it was literally the only move they could go for without just losing the game. King e1, which was played, is just checkmate in 2 moves. The queen comes onto h4. Every square that the king can step to is controlled by one of my pieces. And so g3 only move, and queen takes on g3 is checkmate. We get a really, really nice win. It shows you the power of attacking chess, even at this very high level. And this is why you want to go after an opponent who is not developing their pieces, who is not putting their king to safety and not castling early. If you can launch an attack at them, you're able to sacrifice pieces in order to just decimate their position. So a very nice game. I'm very proud of how I played here. Apparently, I played with, hold on, let me put the game review up. I played with 95% accuracy. 95% accuracy in the game where I sacrificed a whole piece. So I'm very proud of myself. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully this was instructive. If you did like it, do like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps out a lot. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care. We're back above 2,000, so that's very nice. Let's see if we can go beyond. Catch you next time.